Alrighty, so welcome to week 4 of the summer series. This is our third webinar. Today we're talking about outreach and engagement. Where are the students? A lot of times we have to obviously do this work to serve students. We have to make sure we're able to find students to serve, and that can be sometimes one of the more frustrating parts of starting collegiate recovery initiatives. So we're going to do we did some housekeeping before we started recording, so we're good there. We're going to talk about how to grow a collegiate recovery initiative in a way that is student-centered, but also sustainable. We're going to talk about some programming and recruitment ideas, and then we're going to actually have a really cool Q&A, question and answer, with some Leadership Academy students from our Collegiate Recovery Leadership Academy to talk about, what their experience was, why they got involved with collegiate recovery, and hopefully, for those of you who don't have students yet, this can give you a bit of a insight onto what students are looking for, or some ideas for how to get students involved. So to get started, this is kind of when we have conversations with folks who are just getting started in collegiate recovery or they're struggling. This is often how the conversation starts. We ask how things are going, and they say, I've been doing a whole bunch of things for all of these students, but no one shows up. I've tried meetings, I've done focus groups, I've tried offering coaching of some sort or some peer mentoring. We've done pizza parties, free food, but still no students show up. So that then is followed up with the question of, can you just then tell me how to start programming for my students? Unfortunately, this question in our work can often narrow down the possibilities of collegiate recovery, which can then set up students to be kind of disappointed. It can set up staff to be disappointed. And so my quick answer is no, I can't really just tell you how to start programming for your students. But what we will do is reframe this question and broaden it quite a bit. And so instead of asking how to program, we ask, how can you start empowering students in recovery or students impacted by addiction or mental health? How do you start empowering them and advocating for them, even if the answer to this question is programming, right? And so if we are empowering and advocating for these students, sometimes it is a program that will be the thing that we do there. Sometimes it's some more behind the scenes stuff. But this is how we zoom out to figure out the more accessible, I guess, handholds, if we're using rock climbing analogies, to start this work. And then we ask, kind of to situate ourselves in these conversations, the question on the left here, which is, how would you feel about identifying as a person in recovery on your campus? And a kind of deeper question is, would you consider your campus recovery supportive? And so some kind of situations that complicate this question, which are the response to this question may be a little bit different depending on the identities that these students hold or the experiences they bring to your programs. And so what a first year 18-year-old student who is looking for kind of that emerging young adult connection might look different than a non-traditionally aged student with children at home who maybe has already been to treatment and maybe has quite a few years of recovery. Again, as you go down this list on the slides, things get more and more complicated as we think about the realities of our students and their relationships with substances, especially as a lot of our students may feel that identifying as a person in recovery may require some interaction with deeper stigma or some interactions with systems that just aren't built to be supportive. And so this reflection on where your university even is can help us start the conversation. So I have this visual here, and this may be the sick person in the middle might be you, right? You might be working on awareness, education, stigma reduction, kind of the talking the talk. You might be doing direct recruitment of students, looking for, how do I reach out to a single student and then get them to be involved with our programming. You may be doing, again, just student programming and community building. And then also you might be doing some of the deeper work of direct advocacy for students and student needs, and also trying to change policy at your university, so walking the walk. Based on some of the conversations we've had this summer so far, you can probably see a bit of the issue here, and it's kind of obvious on the slide. There's a lot of things to balance. And we was having a conversation earlier during a one-on-one of, it's important to do this work kind of as if you are taking as if you have 2 feet kind of taking a step at a time, where one of those steps is supporting students directly and making sure that there's programming and community there. And the other step may be making sure the university is ready for this, making sure the university isn't a deeply, deeply stigmatizing and problematic place, that so that we're not setting students up by bringing them in and then showing them and just showing them experiences about why the university actually is not for them, and kind of, yeah, bringing students in just to disappoint them. And so again, talking the talk, as it shows on the left side of the slide, is really about developing a university culture that accepts students in recovery. Not sliding. Oh gosh, you're right. One second, let me share my slides if you're not seeing them. Thank you, Jason. So I'll go back through some if there's anything I need to refer to. But yes, so this is the visual I was talking about. Thanks, Jason. And so, yeah, so there's this balance that we're doing of developing university culture, holding events, and then undoing things. So you're creating and undoing at the same time. It's kind of that balance of learning and unlearning on behalf of the university, almost as if the university itself is going through a bit of a recovery process in order to support these students. And so again, going back to the previous webinar we had, if you're doing this alone, you're kind of that previous slide of the person balancing all of this. Yeah, it's probably not going to be the most sustainable thing on earth. That's an understatement. Where if we have a team, if we've done the asset mapping, if we've built a system around us where we are working together with people at the university who also do this stuff, again, we can, first of all, we can benefit off of everything that we're all doing together. But also we're not going to burn ourselves out and burn out the programming that we're doing in the process. And so again, we're sharing the awareness, we're sharing the student programming, we're sharing advocacy and policy change, and we're also sharing direct recruitment. One of the examples, kind of how this can work is maybe you are maybe the collegiate recovery person. You're the person who this is in their job description. And so maybe you're working with students to do some awareness events. You're doing advocacy work through ally trainings, for example. Then maybe you have a student group who is then doing the student programming in the community building. And you have maybe a dean of students who's writing new policies or undoing old policies. And then you're all working together to do direct recruitment while all of this is happening. So it's, again, creating an ecosystem that can make this all work. And again, for those of you, all of you who did not see those first slides, you'll get them here and probably tomorrow with the recording. So you should be good there. I do want to stop for a moment and talk about the idea of a student champion. So we're going to be talking today during the panel with the Q&A with the students about the work that they have done. Some of these students are student champions on their campus. They have kind of built collegiate recovery as a student from the ground up. I think a couple of these students have had some staff support, but we do, I think, romanticize a bit in the collegiate recovery world this idea that a student will come along, the student will be in recovery, and they'll just illuminate the future of collegiate recovery on your campus. That may happen. Some of you may have already had that happen on your campus. So there's a bit of a blessing there of, holy cow, thank you, this was great, thank you for doing this. But there's also a bit of a problem there where we end up almost burning through students for the sake of hopefully they will guide us forward. And we, of course, need student impact or student input. We need students to be involved in this work because it is student-focused work. And if the university isn't supportive, we see all the time programs start because students start them, students graduate, and that program disappears. And of course, if we're looking for sustainable programming, then that's something that we need to be thinking about. There's a balance here. We'll talk about that in the Q&A, I'm sure, but you all are here as staff members. Some of you are also students. And so keep this in mind and make sure we're doing this in a responsible way, especially so that we're not bringing in a student who is in recovery and then putting them through such a stressful situation that we're actually kind of putting their recovery in jeopardy by saying, make this work, make it work, make it work, make it work. Again, just being responsible about that. Okay, so I've done kind of the setting the stage of kind of the background thoughts and information here, but we're going to go through now just some practical ideas. So if you're still looking to write that SMART goal that you're going to be turning in at the end of this summer, or the end of these 6 weeks, so 2 weeks from now. There might be some ideas in here that you want to kind of borrow from or ask some more questions about. But we're basically going to make our way through those 4 bubbles that the person was balancing on that slide before. So the first one, again, awareness, education, stigma reduction. So we're going to be asking the question, what does your campus need to know to support these students? So maybe it's recovery ally training for students. Maybe it's recovery ally trainings for staff and faculty. If you've never seen a recovery ally training, if you want to know more about that, make sure to ask your working group leader or email me. I can send you what we have. I believe we're going to be scheduling a recovery ally training kind of how to a week or 2 after the summer series is over, just because some people in the working groups did request that already. So if that's interesting to you or that's something you want to do, let us know. Feel free to put it in the chat, and we'll be digging into that more in the following weeks. The next bullet is just including conversations about recovery in student staff trainings. What's in mind here mostly is like peer education trainings or RA trainings, especially any students that are engaged in any conversations around prevention or alcohol and drugs or mental health. We also need to be having conversations about what is the possible positive outcome here other than just not doing something. So moving from prevention and health promotion to the idea that there are people on campus who are in recovery. There are students on campus, there are faculty on campus, there are people who've been impacted by addiction in other ways. And we will foster a lot more inclusion if we're able to have conversations in a meaningful way that tell our students, you're able to have these conversations on campus, we're allowed to be open about them, and we should be. So the next one is naloxone and Narcan training. If you are not familiar with naloxone or Narcan, I would say that is something to put on the top of your to-do list. We've lost, I think, 93,000 people passed away this past calendar year from an overdose. And we actually just launched a campaign yesterday from Safe Project and a handful of other nonprofits and coalitions called Reverse This Silence. And so if you go to Safe Project social media, you'll see some of those videos. I'll probably be showing one next week as well as an example of some advocacy work. But yeah, if you don't know where Narcan is available on your campus or around your campus, if you don't know if naloxone is accessible to students or to staff, that is a question I would ask sooner rather than later, just because saving lives isn't really negotiable. And so, especially now that we've seen the numbers of overdoses and fatal overdoses spike incredibly high, we need to be thinking about this as well. Also, if you need some support with Narcan or naloxone training, our team is able to kind of facilitate the donation of Narcan or naloxone to your campus, and also train the trainers for that as well, so that you are able to, or your students are able to train people on your campus to save lives. The final bullet here is just general marketing, social media, and social norming campaigns. And so just again, putting conversations and messages around recovery, normalizing, helping conversations around addiction and substance use disorder and other mental health and behavioral disorders. I'm just, again, putting messages out there that allow us to have these conversations and give us permission. When campuses can sometimes feel kind of buttoned up all the way to the neck, if we can have some conversations to allow us to humanize that a little bit, I always encourage us to do so. Then there's a student programming and community building. So what can you in your position do to uniquely offer resources to students impacted by addiction and those in recovery? Some examples here are just social events. The question I always encourage folks to ask there are, who are these social events for? Are you hosting a person in recovery specific social event? So again, only for people who identify as in recovery? Are you hosting an event for people who just need to know more or should know more about addiction and recovery? Again, just what is your scope there? I think that's an important thing to make pretty clear, so that we can clarify what spaces are safe and welcoming for whom. Again, just so that students can navigate spaces more intentionally. Study sessions, I always encourage those. Finals week and midterms are always very stressful. If you have a space on campus that you can offer as a sober study space or a study space for your folks in recovery, definitely encourage that. Bring snacks, bring drinks, order some food. Yeah, just have resources around for those students. Of course, we always have folks who want to start by offering recovery meetings. That's awesome. I always encourage that as well. just be thoughtful about what pathways of recovery or what types of meetings you're offering, so that we are, again, being as inclusive as possible, but also as purposeful and effective as possible. I also encourage some folks to, if you can, for example, if you don't think your position allows you to work with students really at where they are and what they want to do. I use an example of one of the schools we're working with right now that's not in the summer series. They started this collegiate recovery community as staff members, but then as soon as the students had ideas, the university didn't quite know how to get behind them. And so instead, we've helped those students create a student organization where they have at least a couple $100 that they've been approved for, that they can navigate themselves without really having to ask for much permission, where then you as a staff member can advocate on the back end for more money, more opportunities, kind of maybe more programming that they're not able to, the students aren't able to quite put into action without your help. And then sober tailgates are a cool option. If you have a sports heavy school, just giving students a space to gather and have fun together in a safer manner before games is a really fun thing to do. And then of course, game or movie nights. All right, the final two we're going to go over before we get to the Q&A is just direct advocacy and policy change. And so the question there being, in what ways was your campus and is your campus not built for students in recovery? When you walk and you bring your way through the conversation of how students find the university, how they get into the university, how they move about the experience of being a student, at every step of the way, there are opportunities for stigma, for barriers, for just lack of support where there should be support. And so if you can think your way through that kind of life cycle of a student, you might be able to think about some ways to make some change. And so some examples here are, looking at your admissions policy and the way that criminal history is considered or GPA is considered, and thinking about if a student is in recovery or is seeking an education after being in recovery for a certain amount of time, how relevant is their criminal history, or is their criminal history also maybe even an asset? We may talk about that in the Q&A as well. And then also if students were in active addiction or in active use when they were in high school, their GPA likely is not as much of a representation of what they will bring to college as it could be. And so can we have more complex systems that allow for the humanizing there rather than just checking boxes and denying students based on arbitrary things? One thing that some bigger CRPs and CRCs do is they actually get almost like a little handful of admissions waivers where, say, I know Brandon in the audience, and I know Brandon wants to come to my university, and I've met Brandon and I've talked, I've looked at his application, and I've said, based on maybe some of the things that we wouldn't typically be super excited about from a student, maybe criminal history or low GPA in high school, I believe, and I have a waiver to say we will bring the student in anyway. And so maybe there's 5 or 6 of those a year that the CRP staff, the Collegiate Recovery staff can use to advocate for student admissions. A kind of a question to ask of your university is, what is the alcohol and drug culture at your university, and is it backed up by the institution? Example I use is there's a university that I used to work for that was considering a policy where if you went to a new eating establishment on campus, if you bought alcohol, then you got free food. But if you bought free food, you didn't get a free drink. Or if you bought food, you didn't get a free non-alcoholic drink. So it was very much we're going to encourage you for the sake of money to buy alcohol, and then we can also encourage eating for hopefully safer consumption of alcohol. But what that did was kind of send a message that we weren't really considering students in recovery and making that a more fair conversation about access to this restaurant or to this new eating establishment on campus. And so that's just one example, but thinking about like for graduate schools, are they pretty regularly offering alcohol at events because that's kind of, they've resigned to the idea that that's the best way to get students to come to events? Are we having more complicated conversations there, and at least even acknowledging that students in recovery may be here and they are here, and that they would want to attend those meetings but may no longer feel safe doing so, depending on their recovery length or their relationship with substances during their recovery, things like that. To go back to the conversation we had last slide about naloxone and Narcan, there is some policy change that can be had to make naloxone availability better and make the there's a lot of, like, universities typically worry about legality and the safety around having naloxone and Narcan on campus. So that requires some pretty intense advocacy sometimes. But again, we can help as much as we can with that. If you have those questions, you're experiencing that. But naloxone availability can be both a stigma conversation and a policy conversation. It's a really cool intersection there. And then there's a ton of these, and I could go on all day, but the last one I'll mention is looking very closely at your student conduct policies. So typically conduct serves as a way to, it's intended to be restorative, similar to a lot of our systems in our country where they're intended to be restorative and they don't always meet that mark. And so just having a reflective conversation, an honest conversation with your conduct folks on your campus to ask the question of, is there a way for the conduct system to be a pathway towards recovery rather than a pathway towards exclusion and maybe even a deeper and more dangerous relationship with mental health and substance use? Is there a way for us to use conduct when possible to forward someone into a recovery pathway or into learning the skills and the ideas of recovery? Again, if you have more questions about that, please feel free to ask them in the chat. And then the last bit for practical ideas is just direct recruitment. And so the question there being, where can you learn about and connect with particular potential students? And so do you have a connection with local colleges, like community colleges? Do you have a connection with local treatment centers and even high schools, especially if you're in a city that has a recovery high school? If you have not met with those folks, I would highly encourage it. Recovery high schools aren't as common as we'd like them to be yet, but if you're in a bigger city, you may have a recovery high school in your area. And so getting involved there can be really important. But yeah, just being well networked. Again, the asset mapping that we talked about last time, just being connected and following through with the ideas that if you have a big enough network, you might be able to recruit more students. Do you also have referral systems within the university? So do the people who have vulnerable conversations with students, do they have the ability to think, oh, I should forward that student to Dylan? Can they just hand that student Dylan's card, or can they give that student the website, and can they explain fluently the idea of what collegiate recovery means and why they would even make that referral? And then also, please don't be shy about approaching local recovery communities and organizations. Collegiate recovery has a bit of a habit of walling itself off from the local community, even though most of these students will graduate and become part of the local community, or the local community will become students. And so building a bit of a pathway in and out of the university for folks in recovery through that networking can be really important. Just to underscore all of this, if you've taken the census, you've likely seen a lot of these ideas written into the census questions you answered. And so again, keep thinking of ways to make a SMART goal and to make a sustainable goal for yourselves as you complete this program. All right, so those of you who are engaged and who are by a keyboard, I want to ask one question of you, get a couple responses here, is what do you want a student's first impression of collegiate recovery to be? If you're meeting a student for the first time who is considering collegiate recovery, who wants to learn more about your program, what is that first feeling you want them to have when they hear about what you're offering? And again, feel free to put answers in the chat. Welcoming, yep. Opportunity to be joyful, yep. Connection, love it. Welcoming and trusting environment, love it. Connection, belonging, acceptance, beautiful. Yeah, I agree. And I would often tell our students that our collegiate recovery community was really just, it was whatever they wanted it to be. It was, and our staff's job was to just reinforce that whenever we could and challenge it whenever we needed to, but really to make that space whatever they needed it to be, because we were lucky to have a physical space. And so it was really their home base on campus for whatever they needed. So with that in mind, I'm actually going to ask our 3 panelists to unmute themselves and to bring themselves off of whatever the opposite of being on video is. I don't know if it's like not a mute version for video. But yeah, we're going to have you three introduce yourselves. And so we'll start with Eugene. If you would like to, obviously, your name, university, pronouns if you'd like, and then yeah, just what your general relationship was or is with collegiate recovery.
Hi, everyone. I'm Eugene. I go to Pratt Institute. I'm a senior, but I'm on a non-traditional path. My pronouns are he, they, and my experience with collegiate recovery is I joined my school's collegiate recovery community in 2017. I helped to basically found it at that time, and I've taken several medical leaves and I've always come back, and it's been really supportive as a space and way to connect with other students in recovery.
Thanks. Matt, you want to go next?
Sure. My name is Matt Patterson. I am at Florida Atlantic University. I, along with two other students, founded the collegiate recovery community here at FAU last summer during the pandemic. We have 18 members now. And I get my bachelor's next week and I start my master's 2 weeks after that. So.
Nice. Mary, what about you?
Hey, I'm Mary Odell. I just graduated with my master's in social work in May from Jackson State University in Alabama. So I joined the collegiate recovery community on campus at JSU in 2018. I'm a non-traditional student and trying to complete my undergrad at that time. And it gave me, and it opened my eyes to see that there were other individuals on campus that understood what I was going through, very relatable and accepting of me, and helped me to definitely find motivation and drive to complete what I started and more.
Nice, and congratulations again. So we're going to start with probably the broadest question of the day so far. But yeah, feel free to give your general thoughts on, and then we'll dig in with other questions. But what advice would you give for the folks, like the folks in the audience, who may be struggling to recruit students on their campus? Actually, I don't know if any of you have any, like, anybody wants to go first on this one, and I'll call people out for the other questions.
I can start off. We have a really loose membership requirement here. Like most of my membership at my CRC, we're a student organization, like a club, is just somebody clicking yes on the OWL Central website and saying that I am also a person in recovery, which attacks and then we have a handful, about 5 of us that are actively involved in putting on events and going to meetings and meeting regularly to develop the CRC. But one thing we've come along is we linked up with Owls Care, which is like the mental health and wellness department of FAU. They support us. So when we do these things, when you become a new student or you go through orientation, there's an EverFi training. They're the most annoying things you'll ever do in your life. They go on forever. You watch all these videos about how to ask for consent, and it has to be verbal and enthusiastic. I learned that. It's like offering somebody a cup of tea or something. You can't give it to them if they're unconscious. I'm going on a tangent, but they ask you about alcohol and drugs too in there, and you do an alcohol education and things like that, how much alcohol is in one drink. And at the end, it asks you if you identify as a person in recovery, if you'd like to know more about being in recovery. And then it links you to our Instagram, our Facebook, and to our student organization. So like, we get an upward thing. So people in recovery that are starting school, they know right off the bat that there is an inclusive environment. There is a group of like-minded students that they can come reach out to. So, but that took a while to get us on. Well, it took us about a year to get it on there. So.
Wow. Yeah. So being quite literally ingrained in a kind of pathway that every student has to go through those classes. And so that's one way for the university to say we care enough to put that in front of every student before they come on campus. Mary, I don't know if you have any thoughts.
So initially we we just had the doing the outreach as far as setting up booths and getting our information out. People will come through. So our advisors and counseling services, people come through counseling services. They would refer them to the CRC. And then, now we have changed policy to be more inclusive, to add, anyone that's interested, whether they have any time of sobriety or just curious about what recovery is. So that has helped us to grow some and, have more individuals interested in CRC.
Yeah, Eugene, we'll go to you next. I also want to kind of piggyback onto this question and kind of continue on of who would be involved with your CRC? Like, kind of who is included and who is not? How do you define recovery, or how do you define the edges of the CRC? So to give you both of those questions, Eugene. Yeah.
So that's interesting. Actually, our definition of recovery has kind of evolved over time. At first, it was really geared towards like alcohol and substance abuse, but there was in that like welcome email about the CRC, it also talked about addictive behaviors, and that's how I got into the CRC. So it was really through talking to our advisor that we realized that the population at my school could really benefit from a wider definition of recovery, because a lot of people were suffering from or struggling with addictive behaviors that did not necessarily have to do with alcohol or substance abuse. So for us, recovery is defined as trying to limit addictive behaviors, trying to pursue wellness. It's kind of a multifaceted definition that it's different for everyone, but I saw recently we're putting together information for our CRC, and the Department of, it's called SAMHSA. They have a great little brochure about the definition of recovery and all the different facets of it. But that's really helped for kind of recruiting students, is to be more welcoming towards people who maybe hesitate to identify as being in recovery, but technically are. A big way that I think a big way to recruit students on campus is to make sure that leaders on campus, whether that's actual professors, whether that's advisors, student leaders, RAs, RDs, having those people know to refer any student that they talk to who admits that they're having a tough time and maybe want to pursue recovery. Being able to have those leaders refer people to the CRC is, I think, one of the most successful ways to get people who are really interested in being there, as well as, like Matt said, like having the counseling center refer students as well. So that's a big way that we've gotten it. And we've also, I think, just having the word out, having posters and emails sent out to the student body that have titles like, are you trying to reduce your intake of substances, or are you in recovery, or are you trying to reduce participation in addictive behavior? Some wording like that, that's a question. And if the student is like, yeah, then they'll click on it, or they'll stop and read the poster, and then they'll find more information that way.
Yeah, and to piggyback off your question or your thoughts on kind of having people refer students, I think trust is a big thing to navigate. Like if you're a student and you don't trust the university, why are you going to trust somebody at a university you don't trust to send you to somebody else you might not trust? And be like, oh wow, someone's going to help me finally, or someone's going to finally be someone I should trust. And so underneath that is the question of, how did you learn about what was on your campus, and then what attracted you to it? Mary, do you want to go first on this one?
For me, I just happened to be in the right class. It was my first class and I was scared, and I talked to my instructor after class, and she directed me in the right directions, told me about she told me the name of the advisor and about the CRC, gave me just a little bit of information. I said, yes, that's what I need. And it absolutely was.
Eugene, what about you?
So I actually saw one of those emails that said, are you struggling with an addictive behavior? And at the time I really was. I was having a difficult time stopping, and didn't really know that there was an option to have more help from other people at my school. And so when I saw this, it was at a time when I was really kind of yearning for outreach, and it was like the perfect timing. So I clicked on it, reached out, and met with the advisor.
Nice. What are you thinking? So now you built yours basically, Matt. So it's a bit of a probably different conversation, but also then how did you even learn enough to build it?
I was voluntold basically. When I applied to FAU, I was only a year sober. I was technically still living at my treatment center, but I was out of treatment. And because I'm a formerly incarcerated person or a convicted felon, I had to go through an admissions review board. I got denied the first time. And so actually the review board like deferred a decision. I had to write an essay and get all my court documents and dispositions, and it was really stressful. And I had to go before the Dean Pusey. And she was her first year there. She was an interim dean, and she came from a school out in California that had a huge CRC called something like the Healing Highlanders, I think it was. And I lucked out, because she was all ready to accept me and wanted me to put me on this mission and stuff like that. And I wrote a beautiful essay about how much I love recovery. So when she offered me a recovery thing, I couldn't say no. I'm really busy, but yeah. So, but no, I did, and I'm glad I did. But at the same time, see, I'm going to sound like a hypocrite, but I support Ban the Box, because do you know how many times I stopped filling out that application and put it aside because of that question there? Are you, not even, it just said, or have you been arrested? Shit, I've been arrested 34 times. I've only been convicted like 8. That's a pretty good percentage, to be honest. But I mean, yeah, there was a stigma to it, but I'm glad it happened. And it's funny now because now I get to use our CRC as like a vehicle to support those other issues that I support, like Ban the Box and attack stigma that. But I like to bring up, I got lucky with her. Other students aren't as lucky as me. That is a disqualifying barrier to education. It is not how it turned out for me. So, but that's how it happened for me.
Yeah, your point about kind of intersecting issues and intersecting things we can advocate for, I think is well taken, where it's hard to say you support students in recovery, but, oh, sorry, I only support the students who weren't ever experiencing these consequences of addiction, right? Or the students who look a certain way or who act a certain way. And that universities are kind of built to do that. And if we don't think about it hard enough and actually be intentional about issues like Ban the Box, then we are resigning ourselves to just accepting the barriers that were built into the university that may have disproportionate effects on students who have experienced disordered behaviors or addictive behaviors. So, any other thoughts on that before I move on? We can always come back.
I can say the way Oregon does it now, they just passed. I was talking to Noel Vest on Facebook the other day. He did these webinars, I think, and then they accept you at the college first and then ask you that question. And it works just as well, just putting it out there. And it doesn't limit people from filling out the application. I still would have said yes after I was accepted. So, yeah, just saying.
Yeah, and so then what is it about collegiate recovery, and what does it offer that the rest of the recovery community or movement may not? I don't know if any of you can go first on this one. I don't want to call anybody out.
I can share briefly. I think something that's really valuable about collegiate recovery is that it's people within the school that you're going to that have the same, like a very similar student experience as you. So they, when you're in a recovery community or movement outside of a school, there are people from all different backgrounds, all different walks of life, all different ages. And in a collegiate recovery community, it's very specifically people who are interested in education, in higher education, and people who are pursuing that. They have maybe similar student experiences of having homework and having tests to study for and projects to do. So it just kind of adds a layer of connection on that front as students.
Matt, you want to go next?
Sure. I think I touched on this earlier, but it gives me a voice for my other issues. Like, I live in South Florida. You can throw a rock in any direction to hit a 12-step meeting. I come from a 12-step background. I do, but in my 12-step meetings, I was always taught to bring it back to me. What am I doing? What's my part in it and stuff like that. But there are larger issues if you think critically about stuff like ban the box and institutional racism, systemic racism, stuff like that, that I want to be able to implement change. I'm a social work student. That's what I do, and it was an avenue for me to kind of evolve as a person outside of just my own recovery and into the recovery movement. I support things like harm reduction. Harm reduction is not the biggest, thing in 12-step, I support, we have 2 needle exchanges in South Florida. That's it. So like that, Narcan. I remember I talked to you about this, Dylan. To get Narcan training on my campus, I was denied time after time after time. That was my original impact project. I wanted Narcan next to the AEDs and to teach CPR and Narcan training to every resident advisor. Makes sense to me. If somebody's not breathing in South Florida, they're high. Like, that's an overdose. Nobody just chokes down here. Nobody. We all chew our food very well. But they wouldn't do it. They said, no, liability this, liability that. So I had resigned to just push medical amnesty, House Bill 595. If you're in trouble or your buddy's in trouble, hide the dope and call 911 because you can't get kicked out of school. You can't get in trouble. We have that institutional culture where we'll send you to counseling and it won't go on your record and stuff like that. But I pushed and I pushed and I pushed, and we're doing a Narcan training on campus September 3rd. I got the right people, the right network. I know, it's amazing. As soon as we're done with the impact projects, I get the approval. So, but we're still gonna do it. It's gonna be awesome. And we linked up with an organization, Ban the Box. So like, it's all intersectional.
Yeah. It's awesome. Mary, what about you?
Yeah, so our collegiate recovery, it's just very inclusive. Now, we reach out to everyone on campus, staff, everyone to come to our support group meetings. And it's funny, kind of what Eugene had said. The name of it is Common Ground because we all have that common ground. We're there on campus. We're all, either students, staff, employees of the campus. We all have the common interest of wanting and needing support, looking for just answers or just wanting to be heard. So having that, and then just that camaraderie and just the togetherness and support that you get, that to a whole nother level that you may not get in other organizations in the community.
Nice. Yeah, I have a bit of a random question that I've been thinking of is there's obviously some really cool bonding that can happen between students working with, like, getting to know other students in recovery. But would you have any of you have any thoughts on the importance of kind of opening up a recovery community on campus as well to potential students who aren't yet students, or community college students, or just general community members? Have any of you been able to do that? And if you have or haven't, just curious of what your thoughts are on that openness.
It's funny. We had a really interesting phenomenon done. We were having trouble recruiting students and getting the word out. And we opened up our social media more, and we were getting a better online presence. And all of a sudden we started getting emails from parents whose kids were in treatment looking to see what we could offer them when they got out. And I didn't know how to respond to that initially. They wanted to know if we had sober dorms, if we had like, I guess years ago, FAU had a sober dorm or a treatment center on campus, but that's been gone for a while now. And, you know, I got to learn a lot about the resources in the community and Boca and stuff like that and how we can support parents. And then also what happened as a result was we somehow, a staff member at FAU contacted us, and we found out that her son had overdosed and died in college years ago, and she wanted to make an impact. And I found that our greatest support came not only from allies, but from parents in that organization. And they're who's helping with the signage and the funding at this event we're doing in September. They're going to do a remembrance walk, because September's Recovery Month, but August is International Overdose Awareness Month. So, I mean, you got to think bigger. Like I said, recovery movement is bigger than a personal recovery. There's ways to help without even, you know, you don't have to have an addiction to care about people who have addiction. So that's how we opened it up.
Eugene, you had a thought?
I don't remember my thought. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. Mary, is your CRC like kind of pretty tight to the campus, or have you been able to kind of invite some other folks in?
It is. I mean, we have people that are not actually students that come to the meetings. But, you know, I had mentioned, and we've talked about reaching out to the community college because I think that would be a great place, you know, to have one, and even just to come together. So that's something that still is, you know, on the table that we discuss, but, you know, because we're kind of small, it takes a lot to get, you know, to get things started.
Yeah, I mean, when I was a student, we had our recovery community, we were super tight with the local community college. And then when I worked at a private school, the university was like, well, we've already taken a risk on these students enough. Why are we taking more of a risk by opening it up even more? And of course, it's not fun to hear. And it's not the most unstigmatizing thing in the world. But yeah, sometimes those barriers are real. And still at that private school, one of our most involved students was not actually a student. And so work around it, you figure it out. But so we'll go to I think the final question that was pre-written. And so as we're going through this question, if folks in the audience have other questions, or even the panelists, if you have another question you want to talk about, we can keep going because we still have about 10 minutes left. But the final question is just about you three. What has been your most impactful and rewarding experience in collegiate recovery? And then how would you, if you could, replicate that for other students? Mary, you want to start on this one? You can say no if you want.
No, that's fine. Just, you know, continuing the naloxone trainings on campus. You know, my goal is to have naloxone in every building, dorm, everything on campus. The administration has been great, allowing us to, you know, have the trainings. You know, I'm glad that Matt's able to have that, you know, coming up in September. But yeah, so that, and just advocating in the community, on campus, you know, and hopefully soon we'll be able to go to the community colleges. You know, that's something definitely on my list. It's just finding the time to do it. But you know, advocacy is huge. The more we speak and reach out to others, you know, that's the only way that we'll be able to keep it going and have others know about it, because there are people out there that have no clue, you know, and are looking for somewhere to go, somewhere to be accepted. So yeah.
All right. Eugene, what about you?
I think one of the most impactful, like a really rewarding experience I've had recently is actually the work that I've done with Safe Fellowship, the Safe Project, I mean, doing the fellowship. I was encouraged by my CRC advisor to apply because I've been doing kind of leadership work for the CRC for a few years now. And it was really great to be able to do a project and connect with other people in recovery, and bring that empowerment back to my CRC, and kind of have new ideas and be able to grow it and stuff.
I appreciate the plug. For those, I think we mentioned it before, but actually applications are open now as we said, we had said this last week, but applications for our Collegiate Recovery Leadership Academy are actually now open for the fellowship that starts this fall. And so if you have students who come to mind when you think about student leaders who would benefit from, an inclusive or an empowering environment around collegiate recovery from other students from around the country, we'll put that link in the chat here in a bit. I mean, we'll send it via email again, but yeah, I'm glad that was a good experience for you, Eugene. Matt, what are you thinking?
I mean, I'm with Eugene. That trip to Utah and stuff, that retreat, that was awesome. I mean, before I went back to school, like I got sober January 12, 2019. From 2013 to like 2018, I was either homeless or in jail. Pretty much an even split there. And like, so I didn't take many trips. You know, most of the time I wasn't allowed to leave the state, not that I could afford it. And so that was a big impactful thing. But then like also just to be like included in conversations with staff members and stuff like that on campus about policy and things. Because like you mentioned earlier, the value of lived experience. You know, I used what's called the homeless tuition waiver to go to school. So, I mean, that's an supportive and recovery supportive kind of thing, but it creates this stigma, this imposter syndrome. And to be asked like up front how to affect these other issues and stuff, it made me feel more involved. Like it was the pandemic. I wasn't on FAU. I've been to FAU's campus maybe 6 times, but I've never felt more like a college student in my entire life. You know, I know everybody. Like, and that's kind of like through the CRC and through the SAFE project. And I mean, and I did too. I jacked everybody else's ideas from that retreat. If you had a good idea when you shared your project, that's in my pocket now. Like part of my recovery is taking what I hear at one meeting and pawning it off as my own at the next. It's worked this far, you know? So thanks for letting me share.
No, yeah, I want to underscore that too. Is like what you all have shared is that like, I think as professionals, it can feel awkward to have a student in a serious staff level conversation. And I think it's also very valuable to have a lived student experience present in those conversations, where it's really easy to stigmatize someone when you're not looking at them. It's really easy to judge someone when they're not there to defend themselves. And so obviously, like I said before, we don't want to bring students in as champions and then just burn through them. But if you have a student who you feel like it would be a safe way for them to be involved is to come to meetings with you or to be involved in the advocacy work you're doing as a staff member, ask your students if they want to come with you, or ask the person you're meeting with if it's okay to have a student involved. Because if it's a student affairs work and we're not involving students in the decisions, we kind of miss the point, I think. A lot of times we will often go in directions that a student could have easily told us, like, not going to work, sorry, let's try something else. I'm sure the 3 of you have probably seen some of those moments where you're like, meh, let's turn this a little bit in a different direction. Do you 3 of you have any other thoughts? And as well, people in the audience, if you want to ask questions, now would be a great time to put them in. But final thoughts from you 3, if there are any.
Not sure if this is specific to Pratt because it's an art school, but I think some of the most valuable experiences, I think, in the CRC, other than just the leadership positions, I think from a member point of view, have been the unique socials that we've done. And one of the ones that stick out in my mind was like a performance that we did where a bunch of us collaborated together to do like performance art that had to do with our recovery. And I think that's part of the reason why it was so impactful was because it was a form of like art therapy, of getting out the frustrations that we've had and kind of turning it into something with sound and that was visual, and that was really helpful. So I think when you're thinking about doing socials, thinking outside of the box can function to not just draw people in, but really bring the CRC closer together. So we've had all kinds of socials. We, other than the performance one, another social we had was we did a body positive pole dancing class, like, just random kinds of like fun activities that might have to do with exercise, but are also empowering, or ways to get your thoughts out in a creative way. That was really great for us to do.
Yeah. Thanks. All right, I don't see any questions. Matt, you have one more thought before?
I was just gonna say, like, don't get discouraged. I do a lot of undergraduate research, and a lot of the codes that come up the most often with marginalized or stigmatized populations is the need for necessary and consistent sustained recruitment and engagement, because that's what stigma does. It separates us. It tells us we're less than. I'm getting a degree in 2 weeks and I don't feel like that's a real thing yet. It's going to take months before that sinks in. So yeah, don't get discouraged. It's great. And people have a need to tell their story too. And my sponsor always says that hope is hearing other people's experiences. And I wasn't going to get through a webinar without using an acronym. So there you go.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah. Thank you both. Thank all three of you for sharing your time and sharing your experiences with us and with the audience. So just so folks know, I will at least stay around for 30 minutes after the webinar. Any of the speakers, if you are able to stay and you want to stay, feel free. You can help answer some questions. I know some of you are at work and have some other things to do, and that's okay. But again, thank you. Some reminders for the audience for next week is, if you haven't scheduled your one-on-one with your working group leader, please do, if you would like. Keep working on your goal. Again, that will be due at the end of the final working group. And then continue to ask questions. Send us emails. Send us all the things that you're thinking when you're thinking them. Send us random notes. Let us know what questions you have as things come to your mind. And then next week's topic will be, again, advocacy and how to advocate for collegiate recovery. We'll focus both on folks who are looking to get any buy-in and then folks who are looking to advocate for more. So that's all we got for today. But again, thank you all. We will see you again next week. And thanks for hanging out.